Numenor. An island, majestic since its first peak rose from the sea itself. Initially a gift from deities more powerful than anything to roam the land, only to later be cursed to the bottom of the sea once again. Hello, and welcome back to another video from Secrets of the Rings. Today we dive back into the history of one of the most historically important places in Middle-earth, the island of Numenor, and we delve into its culture from rise until fall. The island, initially presented as a gift for the race of men during the Second Age, after the Edain helped the Elves and other races to fight off the evil forces of Morgoth himself, the first and most powerful Dark Lord to ever live. Guided by the star of Eärendil, the first ships arrived at the island by the star patron's son, Elros, who later took the name of Tar Miniatur as his legacy. Elros was the first king of Numenor, and due to his calling, for 50 years the island received increasing numbers of refugees and other migrants, gradually populating the newfound land. But not only permanent folk were allowed to visit. As the island was located in the Great Sea between the immortal lands of Aman, populated by elves, and Middle-earth itself, it was within a somewhat reasonable route to visit and trade. The elves were among the first to pay a visit to the newly built settlements, and from the beginning brought gifts, plants, and animals, teaching the first settlers new skills, knowledges, and secrets, initially guarded by the elves. Because of this, the island received a considerable amount of improvements in the areas of architecture, metallurgy, combat, and even in fine arts. A prosperous new era was dawning, and the Númenóreans knew no bounds to this expansion, fearless with their promising future. Due to its peculiar shape, each peninsula of the island had its own unique features and names. Forostar, the northern promontory, was known to be a land of rocks, cliffs, and high moors. The further north to the peninsula, the steeper the cliffs. Later on, the peak of Sorontil could be seen as a common place for eagles to dwell. There was also the famous abode of Meneldur Elentilmo, heir to the throne and a personal observatory to the stars in the night sky from his tower. Andustar was located in the western promontory and was known as a fertile region, except for its northern areas, which became rockier and more heavily forested by firs. The shores were comprised of 3 bays. The most important one, the Bay of Anduine, was also the location where the port and city of Anduine was established. The city was initially the largest of the island, due to the Elves of Tol Eressëa and their frequent visits to this particular haven. Hærnustar was the southwestern part of the island, known for its vineyards and fertile farmlands. Similar to Andustar, the edges of the peninsula were rockier and more mountainous. The shores had a distinct characteristic of white beaches and grey shingles. Hærostar was the southern promontory, which in fact contained the easternmost point of the island. The region was known to also possess white beaches and housed one of the 2 rivers of the island, Cyril. By the mouth of the river stood the fishing village of Nindamos. The marshlands were known for its calm waters, ideal for small boats of the common folk who inhabited the area. The region also was particularly known to provide a considerable portion of the wood for the kingdom's shipwrights. Orostar was the eastern promontory, with 200 miles west to east. The northern hills of the promontory helped protect the lands from the cold winds of the northern sea. And due to the more favorable conditions, the inland part of the region was famous for its farmlands and grain production. Lastly, the center region of Mittalmar was a grassland pasture, and in the center rising the famous peak of Meneltarma, the Pillar of Heaven, a sacred mountain to the people of Numenor. The 2 main rivers, Nundwain and Cyril, sprang from this region. Within the area, the eastern part of the center was Arandor, also known as Kingsland, where the royal city of Armanelos stood. The port of Romenna was also built to the east of it, and a road connecting the 2 cities and leading to the west part of the island. During the late stages of the island, Armanelos eventually surpassed Andunie, becoming the largest city of the island. As men, although blessed with longer life, stamina, and other important traits, the Númenóreans were still prohibited to visit the undying lands of the Valar, to the west of the island. So by the year 600 of the Second Age, during an expedition to the east, they eventually arrived at Lindon and were welcomed by Gil-galad, the Elven High King. From this initial encounter, new alliances were formed, and the old bonds with the Elves were also rebuilt after the initial years of the island had passed. Men of Eriador also received part of this special treatment, having received assistance from the Númenóreans themselves to chase out the shadow, who had been laying upon their lands for a few centuries by now. But not all encounters were those of bliss and joy. During the year 750 of the Second Age, the Guild of Ventures was established by Aldarion, prince and son of King Tar-Meneldur. His vision was to facilitate the growing necessity for seafaring and the future results of such endeavors. A port was built by the mouth of the river Gwaithlo in Eriador. Although the presence of the Númenóreans was initially tolerated by the inhabitants of Minhiriath and Enedwaith, they later found themselves on a situation of grounding hostilities due to the nature of the ever-growing and expanding navy of the Númenóreans, who demanded more and more timber, which led to the cutting of trees and destruction of the forests in the region. During the year 882 of the Second Age, Tar-Meneldur received a letter from the Elven High King Gil-galad, warning of a new shadow rising from the east. The letter declared that this new shadow had ties as an old servant of Morgoth, and therefore they requested for aid to defend Eriador against this new looming threat. And so the preparations for war began, until about the year 1200 of the Second Age, when the Númenórean permanent settlements were eventually attacked by the forces sent by Sauron. These attacks were unable to destroy the havens and forts of the powerful Númenóreans, but they were enough to disrupt the lumber industry, which the Númenóreans so heavily depended upon, due to their seafaring nature. Later in the Second Age, 495 years later, in the year 1695, Sauron finally launched his official invasion upon Eriador, and once again Gil-galad sent a request for the aid of Númenor. The aid came, but 5 years late, and by the time they arrived, Eriador was mostly sacked and in ruins. With the combined forces, the Númenóreans and remaining elves defeated Sauron, bringing peace to the continent, at least for a while. Such victory came with a cost for the free folk who endured the wrath of Sauron, now having to deal with the proud and ever-lustful empire that was forming under the banner of the Númenóreans. Tributes were demanded from the smaller villages. The liberated folk were now being oppressed by a different master. During a few centuries, a division arose between the factions of the Númenóreans, with each side representing different ideals. The king's men represented this prideful side, who deemed the Númenóreans as the center of the world, and abandoned reasoning with other, lesser folk, abandoning elvish customs and languages. On the other side, there was the faithful, who had decided to remain faithful to their original beliefs as humble and faithful servants of the teachings of the Valar and older elves. The downfall of Númenor lasted for over 1,000 years, and in the year 3243 of the Second Age, Pharazôn, the son of the late Gimilcad, a mighty Númenorian lord, usurped the throne from his uncle's lineage by marrying his cousin, Tar-Miriel, daughter of Tar-Palantir, the late king. During the year of 3261 of the Second Age, Sauron was also known to be again moving his forces within the lands of Mordor, which caused a visit from Ar-Pharazôn to Middle-earth, with an army so powerful that once Sauron saw it, he immediately relinquished his hostile intentions and submitted himself to the authority of the Númenóreans, being taken back to Númenor as a hostage. Sauron was initially imprisoned within the capital, and for a while it was instructed that he should not be dealt with, but isolated and humiliated. But whispers of his words fell like poison to innocent and otherwise foolish ears, and soon enough he began to grow in importance. His suggestions, initially small on daily improvements, grew, and soon enough he was an established and free consultant to the king's court. Sauron knew about the ban of the Valar, a ban that prohibited mortal men to ever visit Aman, and he carefully laid out a plan to instigate the court and its people to a take what's rightfully yours mentality, appealing to the pride and the ever-growing lust for more power that intoxicated the kingdom during its late ages. And slowly, by degrees, so devious was his hold, the king's men were eventually doing human sacrifices and worshipping Melkor in the place of Ilúvatar, the true god who created the world. As time went by, the empire also became more warlike, enslaving people and conquering more land and tributes, with an insatiable desire for more land, more power, and eventually immortality. One of the last actions of the king's men to worship Melkor was to cut down and burn the White Tree, prophesied to signal the end of the lineage of kings, and therefore the kingdom of Númenor. The king then prompted his men to go with him under the counsel of Sauron to conquer Valinor, and therefore win immortality. The potential havoc and taint that the Númenorian armada could cause to Valinor caused the Valar to contact Eru Ilúvatar, who, with one of the few direct actions in history, decided to take Aman and Tol Eressëa from the direct access of the world, and also turned the world from flat to round. Lastly, the sea was made to open up and engulf the hostile forces of the Númenorians, causing their ships to lay forever in the depths of the oceans. The island of Númenor was then accursed with a cataclysm, with great waves hitting the shores and forcing the entire island under the sea as well. The faithful had foreseen the likely fate that the actions led by Ar-Pharazôn, instructed by Sauron, would cause, and had already departed the island in 9 ships by the time the final events occurred. And so came about the end of a once great empire, initially laid upon strong foundations of friendship and hard work, until their ever-growing fear of death and their desire for power and riches took over.